so much for joining me again with another wonderful episode I have for you all. I am Shayla, Shay, Safe Space with Shay, and today we are going to be talking about neuropsychology and brain health. And today I have my fabulous guest, Dr. Dotson. She is a neuropsychologist, author, and speaker. Welcome, Dr. Dotson.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm so excited to have you here today. I had a curiosity in this neuropsychology field. We often hear about neurologists, but the neuropsychology aspect, I'm like, this is interesting and I want to learn more about it. And so I found your work online, and I am so glad that you granted me an opportunity to be here on my podcast today.
I love talking about all things related to brains, so this is perfect.
Awesome. But so before we dive into our topic, I wanted to know what piqued your interest into becoming a neuropsychologist?
It really was my fascination with the brain when I was an undergrad. I remember taking a physiological psychology course. And when we got to the section that talked about the brain and how it functions and how it affects really everything that we do, I was completely fascinated. I just fell in love basically and knew that I wanted to have a career that somehow focused on the brain. So I talked to my professor, who happened to be a neuropsychologist, and she told me about the field of neuropsychology, which I had never heard of before, and that would be a way of really focusing on the brain as a psychologist. And so I said, yep, that's me. Let's do it. How do I become a neuropsychologist? And the rest is history.
I love it. I love it. And I'm so glad you're in this space. So this is awesome. So you guys, we're going to dive in because I have some really good questions. So my first question is, what is neuropsychology, and when would a person seek out a neuropsychologist?
Two really great questions. So what is a neuropsychologist? Neuropsychologists are experts on brain behavior relationships. So that means that we're in some ways a cross between a neurologist and a psychologist, as the name implies. So we definitely are thinking about the brain itself, the structure of the brain, the function of the brain, blood flow, that kind of thing. But what matters for us is, how does that affect your mental health? How does that affect your memory, your thinking abilities, your ability to problem solve, all these other types of cognitive skills, thinking skills, and emotional functioning, social functioning, all gets tied to the brain. And so we're experts on that relationship, both in people who are healthy and in people who have some type of brain-based disorder. So that's really what the field of neuropsychology is. And then I already forgot your second question.
That's okay. So when would a person seek out a neuropsychologist?
So before answering that, let me mention that neuropsychologists can have more of a clinical focus, meaning working with patients, or a research focus, doing the research that informs that work, or both. So someone like myself does both parts of it. For someone who's a clinical neuropsychologist, they're the ones who are working with patients who have some need to get an assessment. So people tend to come to neuropsychologists for different reasons, but usually it's because there's some change in their functioning that either themselves or another medical provider thinks might be due to some type of brain dysfunction. So, for example, someone is having a lot of attentional problems that might be ADHD. That's not my specialty, but some people would do that diagnosis with a neuropsychologist. Someone could have had a head injury. Someone could have had a stroke. So oftentimes there's these medical events that then start to impact the way someone's thinking or the way they're feeling that can prompt the referral to a neuropsychologist. But other times it can be something that's more gradual. I specialize in older adults. So oftentimes as people get older, they start noticing I'm having more memory lapses. I can't focus as much. And they start to wonder if they have Alzheimer's disease or some other type of dementia. So they come to get checked out because they didn't have a medical event. They're just noticing changes in how they're functioning and want to get it checked out. And so we're able to provide an assessment that really takes into account their testing performance on cognitive tests, as well as their medical information about their life, and put that together like a puzzle, really, to see, does this fit with a particular diagnosis and what can we do about it?
Got you. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I can follow that. And so you talked about the brain injury, but is it I guess the area where trauma would, you could have a neuropsychologist that focus on trauma or certain things like that that can affect the brain, I guess.
Trauma most definitely can impact the brain. And what you mostly see with neuropsychologists is maybe not so much people who specialize in trauma,
Okay.
but any good neuropsychologist should be incorporating what research tells us about trauma. So, what I mean by that is there are different things that can affect our brain, either for the good or for the bad. And
Hmm.
these are things that can happen throughout our life and that can affect us on the short term or down the road. So when we do an evaluation, we ask lots of questions about a person's current functioning, their current life circumstances, but also their past, because we're getting that information to help us understand the pattern of their cognitive performance, so their testing performance. If I see someone who tells me they have this history of trauma, particularly in early childhood, and then I test them and I see certain types of test results, I'm going to be thinking, okay, this could be trauma related changes in the brain that are then affecting their cognitive functioning. And that's different than thinking that there's some other medical event going on. So that trauma, that awareness of trauma and its effects is something that, again, any neuropsychologist should be incorporating into their interpretation of test results, and we should be asking about in our evaluations.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
Okay. So the next question is, what is brain health and how is it interconnected with mental and emotional wellness?
So for me, I think of brain health as being all encompassing
Okay.
for all the things that the brain affects, which is everything, right? So our brains literally are responsible for every thought we have, every emotion we feel. It supports our physical functioning because the muscles cannot work without the brain, controlling it. So it really does affect all aspects of life. I consider mental health to be a part of brain health. So the two main pillars of brain health that neuropsychologists focus on are cognitive fitness and then mental health. So I see them as being very much interconnected. So to talk about that a bit more, mental health is all based on the brain, right? So if someone has a mental health disorder, say they have depression, they have an anxiety disorder, PTSD, what have you, that is all based on the brain having some way in which it's not functioning properly. And that could be because of actual physical damage to the structure of the brain, such as some parts that have grown smaller for various reasons. It could be that parts of the brain are not communicating well with each other. It could be because the chemistry in the brain is off in some way, but either way, it's all tied to the brain. And I think that's really important because when we think about that, the brain is part of your body. That means that brain health and mental health are part of just overall health.
Yeah.
It's not some separate bucket that we have to stigmatize and that it's in someone's mind and that it's somehow different. It is your body. It's your body that's either working well or not in certain ways that then can lead to a risk for different mental health conditions.
Wow. That was so good. Yes. I love it.
And that's
I
why I
love
find the brain so fascinating
it.
because the brain is it really is who we are in such a grand sense of that statement. And it's
Absolutely.
fascinating to think about how this tiny little organ affects so much, all of our emotions, all of our mental health, and just every aspect of our lives.
So true, so true. And that to me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, why haven't we been focusing so much on this before? It's like crazy to me, right? Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm glad we're talking about it now. So
I'm glad we're talking about it now. And I think we're at a different time in society where mental health is more, people are more open about it and more willing to talk about it. So I
yeah,
do feel like the word is kind of getting out there a bit more that, hey, this is just part of health, period. So
yeah,
let's talk about it and let's talk about trauma, right? And understand how
yeah.
that affects us. Let's talk about all the different ways that our brain and every aspect of our life intersect. And I'm really grateful to see that change.
Yes, Thank you so much. And I even think just even saying brain health, I think that's something kind of new for people to kind of digest.
Mhm.
Like, wait, brain health. So I
Mhm.
really love how you were able to tie in that is mental health, brain health,
Yes.
mental health. So, yes. Awesome. Okay. So, what are some lifestyle choices and socioeconomic factors that impact brain health in marginalized communities?
That's one of my favorite questions because that really is the core of pretty much everything that I do in my career. There's so much about brain health that is, I don't want to say determined by, but strongly affected by the environments that we live in, that we work in, that we grow up in, but that also can be modified by our lifestyle choices. And so you have this combination of things that are harder to control. For example, I can't control where I grew up as a child, but where I grew up as a child did impact the air that I was breathing, literally, as a child, the water I was drinking. We've learned more and more those things can affect your brain and can start at a young age and affect you ongoing. I can't, at this point in my life, change the schooling that I received when I was a child. I'm grateful that it was good schooling, but for some people, not so much. That does affect your brain as well. People who have high quality education tend to have better brain health overall, particularly if they continue to have some of the positive factors that affect brain health later on in life. Whereas people who have less quality education can start off at a bit of a disadvantage. That doesn't mean that there's no hope and that they can't do anything else that can help to modify it. But it does mean that there's this accumulation across our lives of good and bad factors that can impact our brain health. And some of them, again, that I mentioned already, also our genes that we can't really affect directly, but some of them we can. And that's where lifestyle comes in. How much we're physically active, how socially connected we are, how much we keep our mind engaged and stimulated with learning new things, reading, doing puzzles, problem solving. All of that affects our brain. The food we eat, our stress levels, our sleep, our overall health, these are all things that we have some degree of control over and that we can try to change for the better. And regardless of what happened earlier in life, do some things that can help us have the best brain health now and in the future, which again also means better mental health. Can we completely eliminate the risk for things like depression or like Alzheimer's? No, but we can certainly reduce it with some of those healthy lifestyle choices.
Yes, thank you so much for that too, because I think about like even in my family, like we love sweets, pound cake,
Mhm.
sweet potato pies, all the things, right?
All
So,
good stuff.
but that could be a detriment because diabetes runs in my mom's side of the family and high cholesterol and
Yeah.
you know having creating that still that sacred space where you can connect, but maybe over tea and maybe over changing what you're consuming when you are engaging with family, like those
Absolutely,
things.
and that can be challenging because part of the joy we get in life that
Mhm.
is good for our brain health
Yeah.
are those social connections, that family connections, and
Yeah.
so often that centers around food or the
Yes.
things that you're consuming. And when I talk to my patients and clients who come through my startup company, CerebralFit, I always tell them, you want to be balanced in life. Having healthy dietary habits that are, minimizing sugar and salt and processed foods, accentuating things like fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains. That's what that should be your guidepost, right? But at the same time, that does not mean that you're not ever allowed to, in my case, enjoy having some fried chicken and macaroni and cheese because
Yeah.
I'm a Southern girl and I love it. But
Right.
when I have it, I don't have my plate piled up high and then go back for seconds. I don't eat it for 3 days in a row. I'm balancing out having a meal occasionally with my family that we enjoy, but not making that my general habit. And certainly not saying, people say I'm having a cheat day. Cheat day turns
Yeah.
into a cheat weekend, which is like, oh, the whole week's gone. Forget it. I'm not gonna. No, no, no. That's when you get carried away. So no, you enjoy that one meal and then go back to the better habits, and also try to find ways to eat well, but still being true to who you are. So again, I mentioned I'm a Southern girl. So I can do things like I love my collard greens, right? I grew up in the South, but I don't have to always put the ham hock in it. That's going to be
Right.
fatty and, full of pork. I can make collard greens that are really delicious with some substitutions. So sometimes it's just finding little tweaks to still have that kind of cultural connection and just familial connections that can make food feel like home,
Yeah.
and be able to get that benefit, but minimizing some of the things that aren't so good for the brain.
Good, good. No, that's a good point. Good point. Balance is key.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I thought about too, especially in marginalized communities, how we suppress, repress. We don't openly express ourselves, like how we're feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
that can aid in the lifestyle choices, when we're trying to get through rough patches. How does that affect the brain health?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think there are unfortunately certain cultural norms that
Mhm.
sometimes we need to kind of work against in order to have the best brain health. So we know within, for example, in the Black community, oftentimes you're taught you need to be strong, right? And you need to, like you said, maybe repress those feelings.
Yeah.
And there's reasons for that, historically, what we've gone through as a people, and then even currently, the things that we try to manage and deal with. People are trying to be resilient, which, it's great to have some resilience, but sometimes that comes at the cost of not fully processing emotions, not holding things in. And that internalized stress can really start to impact the body in ways that ultimately affect brain health. So, for example, there's research from my own research lab as well as others that shows that chronic stress in various forms caused by discrimination, financial hardships, different things that people might encounter, particularly within marginalized communities, the body starts to respond in ways that cause heart problems. And those heart problems end up leading to brain problems because heart health and brain health are so closely connected. So, as an example, someone who's under chronic stress can start to have these elevations in certain chemicals in the body, like cortisol, which is a response to stress, that when prolonged can start to affect heart rate variability. So, your heart rate is kind of getting out of whack, if you will. And then that can affect blood flow patterns throughout the body, including the brain. And that then increases your risk for lots of brain based disorders, strokes, Alzheimer's disease, and other types of dementia. There's even a type of depression that seems to be due to some of these sort of vascular changes in the brain that's particularly hard to treat, and they can be particularly debilitating for people. And those are all downstream effects from just having internalized chronic stress that hasn't been dealt with. So that really, for me, is in some ways very sobering to think like, wow, some things we can't control, the sources of stress in our lives. But for me, it makes me that much more passionate about making sure marginalized communities know what things they can do to try to counteract that. And that we can try to find the resilience doesn't come from just kind of grinning and bearing it. It comes from talking about it, getting the mental health treatment, being connected to family and to friends, and taking care of yourself, moving more, trying to work on your sleep. These are not things that are easy to do, but they are things that you can make steps in that direction, and in that way try to counteract some of the things that are harder to control.
Absolutely. Well said. And I thought about what you were saying too. Like, I'm thinking about, okay, if you're already not eating in a balanced way, right? And then you have this chronic stress, it's just like, oh my God, you're on the danger territory,
Right.
having those two. So it is important. And people, I think we don't realize those small changes matter. You
They
don't
do.
have to, think of this long goal or this big thing you have to do. It's the small changes that you do consistently every day that's going to have a greater impact.
That's so true. And I emphasize that a lot when I work with people on their brain health, that it actually can feel overwhelming. Sometimes I almost feel bad if I give a presentation about pillars of brain health, things you should do. And I'll say at the end, this might feel overwhelming because I'm saying, hey, here's your list of 8 different things you should be thinking about and changing. You're not going to go and change all of that overnight. That's too much. And that's going to add stress, which is already bad for your brain, right? So instead, pick 1 or 2 kind of pillars of brain health and make one little small step. So you might say, okay, when it comes to what I eat, I'm going to start using less salt. Stick with that and cut back on your salt for several weeks and then let that become more of a habit. You could make another thing be, I'm going to start moving more. So you might just decide, okay, you know what? I'm going to start with 2 times a week because I haven't been active. And I'm going to say, I'm going to spend even 15 minutes taking a walk, playing with my kids or grandkids, in a more sort of active way. Start with those very practical, small things, and then you build from that. And then you have that feeling of success and it doesn't feel overwhelming. But you cannot overhaul your life at once. It's not practical, and it can become discouraging. So the small steps matter.
Yes, yes, that's your foundation. So good. So I have another question too. I told you I'm into this brain health. So can we talk about individuals who have paranoia? Like, what is going on inside the brain?
Interesting question. So that's a kind of broad question because there's various reasons why someone can have paranoia.
Okay.
And so sometimes paranoia is part of more of a mental health disorder like
Okay.
bipolar disorder or
PTSD,
schizophrenia. Yeah, so you can
PTSD.
have,
Okay.
sometimes it's part of that. And so it's really based on what's going on in the brain due to that.
Okay.
Other times it's just people who have been in chronically negative situations, right?
Okay.
The paranoia can come out of lived experience that trains the body and the brain to always be vigilant and looking out for something bad that's going to happen. And what's difficult in those situations is that oftentimes that paranoia, if you will, gets reinforced because something bad does happen. And so, again, in marginalized communities, unfortunately, we see that, right? Where having stressors, having negative treatment, having difficult situations is more common than in other groups. And that unfortunately can feed that sense of paranoia. But again, it just varies so much because the causes of it really can vary depending on if it's just a response to what's going on truly around you versus there being something that's more tied to a mental health condition.
Ah, okay. Okay. I got you. Okay. I just wanted to know that. And then, because when you talk about the cortisol levels and when they're at an all time high, that's kind of like that fight or flight. And then when you carry that for so long, I can only imagine how it's affecting the chemistry in your brain.
Yeah, so it really is, like you said, kind of tied to fight or flight. So it's the nervous system is constantly thinking, okay, be prepared for attack, basically, because you're feeling the sense of danger
Yeah.
around you all the time. And so we think about that. Sometimes that might sound dramatic, and maybe in someone's mind they're not thinking consciously, oh, there's danger, but their body's responding that way because we start to have what we call hypervigilance. Like we're kind of consciously or unconsciously looking around for what's going to be the next bad thing. You see that a lot in people who, for example, face lots of discrimination. So again, that's kind of really integral to different groups that are marginalized. That at some point you're sort of looking around and might not even realize you're doing it because it's so second nature, right? That you go into a restaurant, you go into a place, and you're kind of wondering, how are you going to be treated? How are people going to look at you? Are you going to be judged? Are you going to be kicked out? All these things that just might go through your mind very quickly. And even if you're not consciously thinking about them, your body can be responding in a way that your heart rate's going up, you're tensing your muscles, those cortisol levels spike up, and you might not even be aware of it because your body's just so used to it that you're not processing it, but it's still having that negative effect on your body.
Yeah, and your brain health overall. So, yes.
Absolutely.
And then I think a lot of people don't realize, well, they probably do, like that does affect your relationships with family, with friends, because it's hard to maintain that,
Yes,
because relationships are built on trust and safety. And so a person that has that, not just PTSD, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, all of that, I feel like they feel that when they're not safe, when they don't feel like, this is a trusting relationship. So
that's
that can
absolutely
also
true.
make them isolate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then that can be a vicious cycle, right? If someone isolates because they're feeling that way, but then it makes it, they're more lonely, they're having more negative sort of physiological effects from loneliness, because we do
Right.
know that loneliness can affect your brain.
Yep.
And then it just goes like a downward spiral. I think
Yeah.
it's also important that it's not just those sort of outright mental health disorders like schizophrenia, depression, and PTSD that cause these problems. With even people who don't have like a formal diagnosis, someone who maybe doesn't have symptoms that are severe enough to even warrant a diagnosis, you can still have levels of it that are bad enough to cause a problem. So we might call them sub-threshold symptoms. Maybe it's not quite, at the level of a mental health disorder, but you're still not doing well. And so I think we want to be careful, and I say this not to you, but to people in general, to not think mental health disorder or you're okay, right? You might not have depression, but you might still be struggling with some symptoms of depression that are difficult. And that's still important. That still can have an impact. So thinking about just overall emotional wellness,
Yes.
that if you're not doing well, whether or not you have a disorder, it's worth trying to do something about it.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. So can we just touch on that topic really quick, as far as emotional wellness, because I'm passionate about that too. What should a person look out for if they know they're not doing emotionally well? Like,
Yeah, I think if people start to notice different, number one, if they just don't feel good, sort of like how physically you start to notice, I'm feeling extra tired or I'm getting these headaches. Sometimes we notice little things physically.
yeah,
You can start to do that sort of check in on for yourself emotionally. Am I just not enjoying things that much anymore? Am I feeling kind of sad? Maybe I don't think I feel depressed, but I don't know. I just don't feel well. Am I finding myself being a little bit more sort of like jumpy, or I can't get worries out of my head? So any of those even small things that feel different, right? Where you're just not emotionally just quite as feeling as good or as comfortable or as satisfied as you used to, that's a good time to think, okay, is there something I can shift here? Is there something that maybe I've just been so busy with work, I haven't been spending time with my friends and family? It might be as simple as that. Or it might be, wow, this is really causing problems with work, with school, with whatever else. It might be time to kind of see a professional and see if there's something going on.
okay. Thank you so much. So, okay, last question. With dementia seemingly on the rise, are there some choices a person can make to combat the illness?
Yes, dementia is definitely a hot topic right now. So, just to give a super quick orientation for people, dementia is a really broad category of different types of medical disorders that cause progressive changes in the brain that lead to memory and cognitive problems and problems doing everyday tasks in life, like driving, shopping, managing your finances and medications, etc. And so dementia includes Alzheimer's disease as the most common cause of dementia, but there are other types of dementia as well that are caused by different types of problems in the brain. So we do know that there's more people getting diagnosed with dementias, and people are worried about it. Right now, the best ways to trying to reduce your risk are to have those healthy lifestyle choices that we talked about already for brain health. So it's doing things when you're younger to have a lower risk as you get older. But even if you're already older, you can still do things to try to protect yourself. So again, it's being physically active, socially active, and kind of mentally engaged. It's getting good sleep, ideally, if possible, or averaging about 7 to 8 hours per night. It's eating well. It's managing your stress. It's taking care of your mental and physical health. Those are the kind of the key pillars. We could be here all day talking about other risk factors because there are lots of things that could affect you, but it's trying to live the healthiest life possible and the most active life possible in all the ways that you can be active. Those are kind of the keys to lowering your risk, especially if you're in a family where dementia runs in the family, or when you do have other things that you've been exposed to, like early trauma, like head injuries, like severe medical conditions that can make that risk higher. You want to kind of try to bring that risk back down with some of those healthy lifestyle choices.
Okay, good, good. Thank you so much for summarizing that. And Dr. Dotson has a book. It's Keep Your Wits About You, The Science of Brain Maintenance as You Age. Please pick this book up. It is such a gem. She explains everything that we just talked about more in detail in this book. So, yes, I was so excited to get a copy of it.
Thank you for getting a copy, and I'm glad that you're enjoying it.
Yes, yes. So before we conclude, do you have any lasting thoughts, any kind of points you want the viewers to take away from this conversation?
I think I would love for the viewers to go away with this feeling empowered, Know that despite the challenges that we have, particularly depending on what, the groups that we belong to, that there's a power within you to be able to make changes that can have the best life possible for yourself. So feel empowered, be bold, don't give up, and just be encouraged.
Thank you. Thank you. And before we get out of here, I want you guys to always know you are worthy, you are deserving, and always find ways to honor yourself. Until next time, bye.
Bye.